good evening. Well, coming up tonight, exclusive new details about the scandal at the Nine Network, with fresh allegations about a Christmas party incident involving their top news chief. This as the company is accused of a major cover-up, plus the bizarre push to ban groups of men. But first tonight, to the International Criminal Court's disgraceful decision that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should be arrested alongside the Hamas terrorists. It's a ruling that's perverse in its logic, that reeks of ideology, not facts, and that punishes Israel for daring to defend itself. Such a morally corrupt decision that yet again wages war on the Jewish homeland at the very time it's under siege from Iran, Hezbollah and Hamas, when it's still fighting to bring its stolen children, even babies, home from rapists and barbarians in dark tunnels. The ICC also fans the flames of anti-Semitism by promoting false claims that Israel is starving Palestinians and deliberately targeting civilians, when the facts show that the opposite is true, as I'll explain in a minute. Well, who was there to sell this appalling judgment but celebrities like Amal Clooney? The decision is a clear disgrace. The idea that you could equate Hamas's barbaric atrocities with Netanyahu defending Jewish citizens from terrorists, well, it confuses reason and it confuses what's right and wrong. Joe Biden's administration strongly and unequivocally denounced the ICC's ruling. Biden himself called it outrageous, and he said there's no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken described the ICC decision as shameful, and he said in a statement that Hamas is a brutal terrorist organisation that carried out the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. So Joe Biden said it's outrageous, Antony Blinken said it's shameful, and there were similar statements from the UK, Germany, Austria and other countries around the world. But Anthony Albanese, nothing. No spine, no morals, no courage. Just like with the vote at the United Nations, Albanese was yet again at odds with our closest ally, the United States. And once again, our Prime Minister was pathetic. Albanese deflected questions, showing no intellect, no moral compass, and he was only outmatched in his ignorance by Chris Bowen.
US President Joe Biden says seeking the arrest warrants of Israeli leaders is outrageous. Do you agree?
Well, I don't comment on court processes in Australia, let alone court processes globally, of which Australia is not a party.
Highly irresponsible by Peter Dutton to drag this through a domestic political debate. We respect the work of the International Criminal Court. International law must always be observed, and nobody gets a free pass from that.
How sad it is for all of us that this is the leadership we have in Australia during this crisis. Well, the coalition called out Albanese's pathetic, weak lack of leadership.
It's an abomination and it needs to be ceased. This action is anti-Semitic and it is against the interests of peace in the Middle East. Either the Prime Minister is not across the detail or he's trying to please a domestic audience here for political purposes.
Well, now let's look at the reasons why the ICC decision is wrong. In an exceptional Wall Street Journal editorial, the board writes that the International Criminal Court has lost sight of the crucial distinction between the death squad and the bomber pilot. They say that the ruling is a subordination of the law in pursuit of Israel. They write that on one side are Israel, its democratic leaders waging a war to reclaim hostages and root out terrorists in Gaza. On the other side is Hamas, which precipitated the war with its mass murder, rape and kidnapping on October 7 and whose officials pledged to do it again and again. Lumping them together is a slander for the history books. They write, imagine some international body prosecuting Tojo and Roosevelt or Hitler and Churchill amid World War II. And on the claims of starvation, the Wall Street Journal responds that Hamas lists 31 Gazans who it claims died of malnutrition or starvation. They say Israel has facilitated the entry of over 542,000 tonnes of aid and over 28,000 aid trucks in an unprecedented effort to supply an enemy's civilians, even while Hamas steals the aid and tries to frustrate the delivery. Israel has begged Egypt for 2 weeks to let in aid at Rafah, while Egypt refuses. Is this the behaviour of an Israeli government bent on starving Gazans? Obviously, it's not. Now, the Times in the UK also reports that it is Hamas that's been obstructing delivery of aid and stealing supplies for its own use and also to sell on the black market at inflated prices. And the Times reports that defensively, the prosecutor Khan says he has consulted an impartial panel. Yet, it is stuffed with radical human rights lawyers who are no friends of Israel. This impartial panel is actually a hanging jury from the Salem School of Law. Verdict first, evidence nowhere. They write that Khan's preposterous move is part of the agenda for Israel's destruction through a pincer movement of genocidal terror, brainwashed street insurrection, and human rights lawfare. And the beneficiary will only be Hamas. The victims will be Israel, the rule of law, and civilization itself. It's a truly terrific piece, and the Times says correctly that this ruling has destroyed what was left of the ICC's credibility. Now, the claim by the ICC that Israel is deliberately targeting civilians simply isn't supported by evidence. No government engaging in war has done more to protect civilian life. Israeli soldiers have even stayed on the phone to residents, waiting for them to get out of apartment buildings before an attack. Israel is treating wounded Palestinians in their own hospitals. And Israeli soldiers drop leaflets and flyers in Arabic, asking civilians to evacuate before going into an area, even though this means they lose the advantage of a surprise attack. The death toll figures produced by Hamas have been so unrealistic that even the United Nations was forced to revise them down by half recently. Half. And if you think it's surprising that the ICC ignored all of this evidence, it's because they didn't set foot on the ground in Israel. There was no proper investigation, and they've been accused of ignoring due process. This was a political, ideological, and quite frankly, racist ruling that does not reflect reality. All right, tonight's panel joins me now, former Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop, and Sky News host, James Morrow. Thank you both for joining me. Bronwyn, what do you make of the ICC decision, but also, perhaps more importantly for all of us, Anthony Albanese's response?
Anthony Albanese's response is predictable. He's a man with no morals, as you said. He's weak, he's pathetic. He remains Albo the Trot. He hasn't changed his views since he was a university student and a demonstrator at university. But as for the ICC, when it came up in 2002 as to whether Australia should sign this treaty, I fought it tooth and nail. I fought it with every fibre in my body because I knew it would be a political court, that the people appointed to it would not be proper, would not give justice, and I fought hard against Alexander Downer. Downer was all for it. I see today it broke his heart to see it such a mess, but it broke my heart when we signed on because it was predictable. There is a provision in that for us, for Australia, we can give 12 months' notice and get out of it. And
we should
immediately give that notice and get out of it. The way that has been brought down, in your editorial, you explained it chapter and verse, but you've got a partisan prosecutor who clearly isn't on the side of Israel and is clearly on the side of Hamas. So we've got to see justice and give notice to get out of the ICC.
James Morrow, you know, you cover federal politics for the Daily Telegraph as well as for Sky News. What do you think of Anthony Albanese here? I mean, it would have been the most easy statement in the world to say no court in the land can possibly draw an equivalence between Hamas and Israel. How couldn't he even come to articulate such a basic statement?
Well, Sharri, I mean, there's a few things to unpack here. Number one, of course, is that this is just indicative of the latest way in which Albanese is trying to have it both ways when it comes to Israel. You know, one day he's saying, oh, no, we can't have anybody saying the river to the sea and all of that stuff. Another day he's saying, I'm not going to condemn the ICC for their obviously biased ruling on this. And Sharri, I think there's more to this that we also need to understand. This is part of a concerted international effort, not even just about Israel, but specifically about the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, Joe Biden said, oh, well, I don't accept this ruling. It's not really, you know, he didn't agree with it. But at the same time, you know, you can feel behind the scenes that this is part of a broader push to delegitimize the Netanyahu government and pressure him out, because the thing that Biden doesn't want and the thing that the international left doesn't want is for Bibi to be successful in prosecuting his war against Hamas and eliminating Hamas, because that then destroys the entire sort of foreign policy that they have, which is about empowering Iran as a regional power through its proxies.
That's a very interesting take. I agree that there's been a lot of international pressure on the Netanyahu government. I think they see him as this kind of Trump-like figure, when in fact Israel is a democracy. It should be entitled to have its elections. He is divisive within Israel, but it's a democracy. We have to respect the decisions they make. And, you know, you can't confuse not supporting Netanyahu, and many people don't, with not supporting Israel. You have to support Israel, even if you don't like the current Prime Minister. We all support Australia, even if many of you watching at home might not like so much our current Prime Minister. Now, speaking of which, the Albanese government has been in office for 2 years now, and most would be wondering, what is the verdict 2 years on? What do they have to show for it? We've seen the failed voice referendum. There's a cost of living crisis, a detainee and migration nightmare. More recently, a controversial budget and steadily declining polls. Bronwyn, 2 years on, how do you think Albo's gone? What would you give his prime ministership so far?
1.5. Seriously.
Surprised it's that high.
Seriously. I mean, ask yourself the question, are you better off or worse off than you were 2 years ago? We've seen 12 interest rate hikes. We've seen a huge jump in immigration levels, which has caused enormous pressure on housing for Australians. We have seen the cost of living, which he promised to bring down, through the roof. You're seeing today, Telstra is going to sack nearly 3,000 people. That is the first telling of how bad things really are. You know, we talked about Albanese and his weakness with regard to the ICC ruling. And I think I said that the ICC prosecutor was on Hamas's side. I meant to say he's really on the side of the Palestinian side. I don't know about Hamas. But I do know that...
I noticed you said that, but in equating Israel with Hamas, that is furthering their agenda.
Yes, it is. And for Albanese not to speak out and say that there is no moral equivalence, and to simply think, oh, I do desperately need this pile of voters who won't vote for me if I say nice things about Israel. It is just pathetic. And there are at least a dozen things you could say about why we're worse off. And when the voter comes to think of it, it is this insane drive for so-called renewable power. When AEMO comes out today and said, we're never going to make, we're going to have blackouts.
We're going to get to the blackouts in a moment. But James, you know, as a political reporter, you follow all of this closely. How do you judge the first 2 years of the Albanese government? And what's your view on whether they could go to an early election?
Yeah, look, I mean, maybe it'll be tiny bit more generous than Bronwyn, may give him a C, you know, just to be nice. But the thing is that what we have seen in the last couple of years has really been just a dramatic decline in Australians' standards of living, our fortunes here. You know, our real GDP is down per person. We're in a per capita recession. A lot of that is due to the fact that, as Bronwyn mentions, you know, high immigration levels mean that we can have more economic activity that hides that. It's a sugar hit. But of course, you know, the cost to social cohesion, infrastructure, everything else, massive. You know, our living standards, our household income, all backwards on his watch. And the thing that I'm really concerned about, you know, people talked about this budget that just got handed down last week as kind of big nothing, but in a lot of ways, too, it sets some really worrisome precedents. You know, it really fully undoes all of the Hawke, Keating, Howard reforms, you know, and instead sets up the government as, again, this sort of intermediating force between big business, big unions, and big government. Government spending, of course, now expanding to 26% or more of GDP, which is insane. And at the same time, you know, now deciding to direct capital where it's going to go. You know, money to billionaires for green hydrogen, this future made in Australia stuff, which is complete nonsense industry policy. I mean, somebody had the comment today. They said, you know, what's next? We're going to resubsidize Holden and Kodak to come back. It doesn't make any sense. But it shows the ethic of this government is all about growing government and growing the role of government in the economy and in people's lives. And the thing I'm really worried about, Sharri, is that as we go forward, this is going to continue to make us poorer relative to where we were, but also poorer relative to other countries that we're competing against.
I mean, look, it's a very controversial policy, the future made in Australia. Like you, I don't know why the government has to subsidise industries and pick companies to invest in, you know, when venture capital gets it wrong so often. But the Treasurer does argue that, in fact, he is being reformist like the Hawke Keating era. He says creating an entire new green industry is being a reforming government. Now, let's turn to an exclusive that James Murray, that you broke today in the Daily Telegraph, that more than 60,000 of the 80,000 failed asylum seekers are still somehow in Australia and allowed to work or study. And you report that only 17 of these, well, people who claim to be refugees but were found not to be, have actually been removed either voluntary or involuntarily over the past 2 months. Bronwyn, look, how is this the case that people are found not to be genuine asylum seekers, but they're allowed to still work and study here?
Because this is the policy of this left-wing government. They want them to stay. They want them to become voters because they think that'll entrench them in the government that they wish to change Australia. The statement that Keating once made, that you change the government, you change the country, is quite right. And this snake charmer, the Treasurer, who's trying to bring about a reinvented capitalism, I think he said it was, really has no idea of the damage he's doing, I don't think. His doctorate is in I studied Keating. I mean, it's pathetic. The IR laws that come in on the 26th of August, which are going to hit industry like you've no idea how bad they are. I've taken a look at them because to keep a current practicing certificate, I have to go and do a course and do my 10 points. So I chose IR. It's horrendous. And it hits on the 26th of August.
That's good to know you're still studying, Bronwyn. James, we're nearly out of time, but I've got to quickly go to you because this was your big story today. Well, tell us about it. What's the government's excuse for this?
Well, you know, they just say that they blame everything on, you know, the system that they inherited and so on and so forth, but they're not doing anything really to fix this huge situation. We're talking 80,000 people have had their applications rejected. Most of these come from people who come from countries, you know, like India India is one of the top sources of these applications when, nobody is really found to be a genuine refugee from there. It's a democracy. They're our ally. It's just a nonsense. We have so many students who then convert their student visas to asylum visas, and then once they've got that, they can stay for 10 years while the process plays out. They establish a life here, and they never get kicked out. The entire refugee system is broken because it's destroying the chances of people who are genuine refugees to get a quick decision, and so many people are abusing it. It's a real shame, and it needs to be fixed, I think.
Yeah, all right. James Morrow, Bronwyn Bishop. Bronwyn, I have to say, you give the government 1.5 out of 10, and yet they're still probably going to be re-elected. I mean, that's the reality. That's what we're looking at.
I'm trusting that won't occur.
All right, we'll see. Thank you both so much for your time. Now, still to come, fresh revelations about the departure of the top news chief at Channel 9 and the network's attempt to cover it up. Plus, the fallout from the budget continues as voters reveal what they'll be spending Chalmers energy rebate on. That's all coming up next. Welcome back. Well, some of Channel 9's biggest stars are speaking about the blokey culture of working under former legendary news guru Darren Wick and their concern that his conduct is now being swept under the carpet. The Nine Network stands accused of covering up allegations that its former Director of News and Current Affairs behaved inappropriately towards women on several occasions, with claims Nine is even using non-disclosure agreements to keep this scandal secret. There are several allegations of inappropriate behaviour involving Wick over the years, yet he kept his job. This included an alleged incident at the Logies after party on the Gold Coast in 2019. Channel 9 stars have also spoken to me today about another incident at a network Christmas party where Wick was described as handsy. It was the talk of the newsroom afterwards, but it was put down to the television boss having had too much to drink. Yet Wick was given a warm send-off when he left the network on March 15, with glowing remarks from some executives. Well, Nine staff was shocked to see him back in the newsroom on April 24th. Several women told us today they felt uncomfortable as he walked around the newsroom for a large part of the day. Well, of the culture at Channel 9 under Darren Wick, one Channel 9 star told me, and I quote, "It was really just the norm. He would get very drunk, and the next day in the newsroom, all the girls would swap stories in the ways in which he would be inappropriate towards them. The environment was very toxic. Women constantly felt pitted against each other, and you felt like you were on eggshells all the time." Another woman said there were concerns about his behaviour because he manipulated young women and undermined senior women. Well, another employee said Nine Corporate Affairs is very defensive of him. As I exclusively revealed last night, a female employee in the television news division made a recent complaint about an alleged incident involving Darren Wick that occurred some years ago. An external legal firm were brought in to investigate while Wick remained on leave. While the firm did not substantiate the claims, the decision was made at the highest levels to let him go, given his alleged pattern of behaviour. But now there's unrest inside Channel 9. 9 employees are accusing the board of a cover-up. The board knew about the complaint, yet there's been no transparency. There are questions now being asked also about Wick's severance package, how large it was, and how does it compare to how the female employee who made the complaint, or how she was treated. Handling the fallout of all of this is Wick's long-term friend, Victoria Buchan, the head of Nine's corporate affairs. Now, the Daily Telegraph has also covered this story tomorrow. The editor, Ben English, has sent me the front page. This is going to be the front page of the Daily Telegraph tomorrow. As you can see there, Darren Wick is on the front page. TV stars unload on departing news boss. That's the headline. And I can read you at least one comment from this story that's been written by journalist Jonathan Moran. One of the women who spoke to Jonathan Moran, one of the television stars, said that he, Darren Wick, has been very divisive. It has been difficult for women to work with, and under him, they've not been happy. At one stage, we were calling him a cockroach and saying he's impossible to metaphorically kill. The metaphorically is in brackets, so he was impossible to kill, calling him a cockroach. One television star said he was just someone we had to work around in our professional lives. So that's in the Daily Telegraph tomorrow as well. Well, the Australian's media writer Sophie Ellsworth has also been following this story, and she joins me now from Melbourne. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. What can you tell us about what the board knew about this fresh complaint that led to Darren Wick's departure?
Well, Sharri, the board knew there was a complaint regarding inappropriate conduct by Wick towards a female staff member, and it was discussed among them. And just to remind viewers, Sharri, these are the most senior people at Nine. The board at Nine is chaired by Peter Costello, and it includes members of the liking of Nine Entertainment CEO Mike Sneesby. Now, it's understood the matter has gone also to Nine's Human Resources Department, and this was all prior to Wick's departure.
Now, I've spoken to many sources at Nine about this issue where employees view it as a very clear cover-up by the board. I mean, this is what people are saying, that it's a cover-up by the board, that there's been no transparency. And the issue of non-disclosure agreements, the use of non-disclosure agreements, has shocked many. What can you tell us about this?
Well, yes, there are non-disclosure agreements involved. And Sharri, when organisations, media or otherwise, are not transparent, it often leads to further problems when information does come to light. Now, Nine should be transparent because we, the Australian, repeatedly asked the network of Wick's whereabouts, and up until 5 days before he announced his resignation in March, we were told, Sharri, that there were no discussions about his departure. Now, I was also told a little as about a fortnight before Darren Wick announced he was leaving that he was actually coming back. He was just on leave. I was told this by Nine. And then suddenly, about 6:30 p.m. on a Friday, the March 15, the day that the email went out from Channel 9, releasing a statement, said he'd quit. Now, Sharri, you and I know when you want a story to be buried and not to be covered, you put it out on a Friday night when all the journalists have signed off, the papers have been put to bed and the news bulletins have gone. And this timing definitely raised eyebrows.
Yeah. Now, do you think Nine is being hypocritical here? This is another key accusation. At the very same time as Nine was misleading you about Wick's absence, they were pursuing their commercial rival Channel 7 about the scandal that was at the time unfolding at Spotlight.
Well, yes, it is hypocritical. They certainly at Nine throw all their resources into chasing stories involving high-profile people, Sharri, whether it's journalists, other networks, or well-known people in the community. And as you said this on your show last night, so where are the editorial resources at Nine Entertainment right now being thrown into this? You've got to remind people here, Sharri, this is the network's most senior news director, and he suddenly left. And in the lead up to Mr. Wick's departure, as I have said, there were also many people talking internally about where he was, and we were reporting this in The Australian. But then, Sharri, suddenly this email came out on a Friday night, and he was gone. So I'm waiting very anxiously, or curiously, should I say, for Nine to follow up both The Australian and Sky and the Daily Telegraph stories on this.
Yeah, well, let's see if they do. What about this issue about the board? Do you think this could turn into a major corporate issue for Nine if the accusations against the board escalate and if shareholders start to question why there hasn't been transparency?
Well, it's fair enough, Sharri, if they do, but time will tell. And I can tell you there are plenty of people, as you know yourself, talking about this situation inside Nine at the moment. and there's more questions that need to be answered on this. Now, Nine releases their financial results in August, and they have an AGM in November. So there's quite a lot of time between now and then, but let's wait and see.
All right, Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for joining me to break that down for us. And if you missed my story, either last night or tonight on this issue, you can head to the Sky News website, also the Daily Telegraph, big story as well on the front page tomorrow. Now, the budget feedback is rolling in, and the major concern for voters is that the government's cash splash will cause inflation and rates to rise. This is according to the latest Freshwater Strategy poll, where nearly 40% of voters think that the budget will force the RBA's hand. Another 46% didn't think it would have any effect on household finances. So to discuss this, let's bring in now Director of Freshwater Strategy, Leo Shanahan. Leo, great to see you again. Look,
thanks, Sharri. Thanks for having me.
What can you tell us about how, because you looked at, there is tax relief for Australians in the budget, both in the form of the $300 energy rebate, also the tax cuts that take effect from the 1st of July. What does your polling tell you about how Australians are planning to spend this money?
Yes, and I don't think that $300 was an accident either, given the promise to reduce cost of living by $275, and it's a convenient amount, obviously. But yes, what do people do with this money, Sharri? And combining that with tax cuts, the short answer is most people are going to spend it. How quickly they spend it and what they spend it on is the key. Now, about 35% of people said they were likely to save that money. About another 33% said they'll pay down debt and spend it. Another 20% said they'll spend it on things they usually buy. Now, the really inflationary stuff is to invest it or spend it on things they wouldn't have bought otherwise. Now, the government might have a point here in the sense that it's not inherently inflationary to pay down debt or to spend it on things. Well, to save it is not inflationary.
Of course.
To spend it on things you usually buy, however, that's when that's where we're kind of entering the zone where we're already in a hyperinflation or very inflationary environment, and then we're really dealing with people who are kind of escaping that wave and letting them continue on in the manner in which they are. That is in an inflationary way, but the government has to do this dance of, giving cost of living relief. They said they would, they've done it, but the extent to which, and there's that key question, will it increase the chance of an interest rate rise? And most people think it will, or at least the majority of respondents at around 40%.
Although you're polling on how people plan to spend it, if it's followed through, that would be good news, and that might mean that it's not as inflationary. Look, let's look at, how Australians feel about energy sources. That this is going to be a key issue in the lead up to the next election. Peter Dutton's put nuclear on the table. What does your research tell us?
Well, look, I think from the get-go, you see solar having support of about 81% of people. So solar is the kind of koala bear at the moment in energy that's everybody still loves.
81% support it.
Yeah, 81%. But natural gas has made a huge breakthrough at around 56% in terms of support. That beats wind. Now, wind's support has really dropped off, both offshore, onshore wind, by about 10%. Now, there's obviously a lot of concern, especially in regional areas, about the role of wind. Now, and gas, despite those activist proponents who are coming out, increasingly against gas, trying to compare it with coal, it is increasingly popular, about 56%. Now, the bad news for Peter Dutton is that nuclear is consistently pretty low at about 36% in terms of support, and 31% of people who actually oppose it. So you've actually got a pretty entrenched opposition to it as well. Coal, 33%, 34%, similarly divisive. But the difference with coal is it's in the system, it's there, we rely on it, and at the moment we certainly need it. Yeah. Nuclear doesn't have that benefit at the moment.
And what about your overall polling? In the overall political figures, in the primary vote, Labor gained 1 point, I understand, to 32%. The coalition remained unchanged at 40%. So talk us through these figures and what it says about how the Prime Minister is going.
Yeah, look, there's no budget bounce. These are kind of overstated, but, they haven't gone backwards, which is good for the government. But Liberal and National parties
spending billions not to go backwards.
Yeah.
Well, a win.
Labor government on 32% primary vote. That's still relatively low compared to what we have the coalition on, which is 40%. Obviously, on a 2% PP basis, the Greens really pushed them up. The Greens have gone up slightly to 14%. So now we're pretty much at status quo on 50-50. Now, if an election were held tomorrow on these numbers, it's more than likely that Labor would form government with about 73 seats, Greens with 4, Liberal National Coalition about 63, and then independents. But this would slip into a minority government.
Yeah,
and then this, of course,
if the coalition managed to get a 40% primary, they'd have a good shot at being in government themselves. But
well, yeah, if they came out with 40%
that would be a remarkable
primary,
attempt. If they managed to get 40%, that would be a very surprising result.
Yeah, the trend is down for the government, and that's clear. And the real question is, how long do they want to risk that trend before going to election? Our analysis says there will be an early election. This will be the last budget under this government.
Yeah, I understand the PM has no intention of going early.
So he says.
All right,
You go if you can win.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Sharri.
Now, after the break, the bizarre proposal for a man ban. Well, there's no man ban on this show, with two gentlemen, Caleb Bond and Nick Cater, joining me next. Plus, why mediation between Linda Reynolds and Brittany Higgins has fallen apart for a second time. Welcome back. Well, ambulance ramping is back in the spotlight, with a Gold Coast man dying after waiting hours for hospital access. He eventually had a heart attack. Ambulance ramping and long wait times when you call 000, even if 000 knows the situation is urgent. Well, this is a problem right across the country. Not enough is being done to fix this crucial issue. If you're having a medical episode, if you're having a heart attack or a stroke, you need urgent attention, not being left in a queue for hours. Well, to discuss, let's bring in Sky News host Caleb Bond and Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Nick, where in the world are you joining us from tonight?
I'm in Stockholm, Sharri. Beautiful Stockholm in springtime. Lovely.
I hope you don't have the syndrome, Nick.
Well, it looks beautiful.
Not yet.
Caleb, we know this issue.
Lovely.
Caleb, we know this issue of ambulance ramping isn't exclusive to Queensland. This is a major issue for state governments right across the country, and none of them seem to be able to fix it.
Well, it's everywhere. I mean, look, the words of Peter Malinauskas, the South Australian Premier, ring in my ears, because he was elected very much on a promise that we will fix the ramping crisis in South Australia. Well, 2 years on, ramping is worse than it has ever been in South Australia. It's bad in Victoria, and that's compounded in Victoria by a really bad 000 system they have down there. And when I was at the Herald Sun, we did quite a bit of coverage in the Sunday Herald Sun on, it was more than 30 people who had died because they weren't having their 000 calls attended to within the time required. So you add all of these things together, and you've got to ask yourself the question, how can we trust any state government to look after anything when they can't deal with the most basic issues such as health? And the population keeps going up. We don't get more hospitals, we don't get more beds, we don't get more ambulances, and somehow we expect the system to work. In SA, if I use that example again, they built a new hospital. They got rid of the old Royal Adelaide Hospital, built a new Royal Adelaide Hospital. It had fewer beds than the old one. Make it make sense.
I mean, state governments get involved in all sorts of things. You just want them to be on top of service delivery. That's what everyone pays their taxes for. Nick Cater, this is shaping up to be now an issue in the Queensland state election. How do you think that's going to play out for Labor?
It should be an issue in the Queensland state election, Sharri, because this is not at its root about a shortage of medical services or a shortage of ambulances. It's about organisation, because other states with the same degree of resources manage this better. And I've said this before, but if you put the head of Amazon in charge of ambulances in Queensland, I think he'd fix it within a day. It's simply a matter of organisation. This poor gentleman should have been accelerated and pushed to the front of the queue. He wasn't. That's about systems. That's about organisation. And I think it's something that the coalition, an incoming coalition government, should and must fix as a matter of priority. And they can do it because it's been done in other places.
Well, I have to say this issue has been just as bad under Coalition and Labor state governments, at least in New South Wales. And if you were that man's family who had died of a heart attack because he wasn't given medical treatment fast enough, because he was just left on an ambulance stretcher, you would be absolutely furious. That fury adding to the grief.
Yeah.
Now, there was a second attempt at mediation talks between Linda Reynolds and Brittany Higgins, and it's failed yet again to reach a settlement. So this is Linda Reynolds' defamation suit against her former political staffer. Now, after leaving the West Australian Supreme Court this afternoon, Linda Reynolds said she'd like to reach a settlement. Have a listen.
Justice Lee made some very comprehensive findings in his judgment, and it is time for all parties to accept all of his comments, and I think that will help us all move forward.
Caleb, this now seems, the mediation talks have failed twice, so it now seems like it's going to go to trial, set for a 6-week trial. I mean, you totally understand that Linda Reynolds would feel very hard done by, and Justice Michael Lee did find that there was no political cover-up. Those were the allegations against her. She ended up with heart problems in hospital. But at the same time, we know that Brittany Higgins has been suffering quite serious mental health issues under the stress of all of this. So, you just hope that they could reach a settlement, that Higgins could apologise for the claims that that Linda Reynolds didn't handle this properly.
Yeah, and you've sort of ended up with this cat and mouse game where, of course, after the case where Justice Lee laid out that there was no political cover-up, David Shiraz, Brittany's fiancé, made comments online to the effect that, we wish Linda would drop this case.
Yeah.
So there's no desire from either side of this defamation case to walk away from it, and I have no doubt that Linda would much prefer to settle because it makes things a lot easier. But it's not going to be an easy process for either of them. As you say, we know Brittany has had mental health issues, and I'm sure a 6-week trial does nothing to help that, particularly after the trial that just happened with Bruce Lerriman. And we know that Linda herself has had health issues connected to this case. Like everything that has transpired ever since it all came to light, everyone who has been touched by this case has come out damaged by it, and I don't think we're about to see anything different in that regard.
Yeah. Nick Cater, do you think either party should walk away here? Or do you think both have a responsibility to just compromise a bit to get this settled?
Absolutely, and having been in a mediation session ahead of a defamation case, I can tell you it is not in anybody's interest to go to court except the lawyers. They are the only people who benefit from going to court. It should be settled now. I'm surprised it hasn't been. I think Linda Reynolds is right to put to Justice Lee's findings and say, well, look, it's quite straightforward. I was blamed for something which I didn't do. My reputation was damaged severely. Possibly my whole political career was damaged because of this. I need some sort of apology and recompense. I don't know why they haven't come to it, but I think it's very, very foolish for them to go to court. And I really think that it would seem, as an outsider, pretty straightforward. You just acknowledge what Justice Lee has said about Linda Reynolds being entirely blameless in this, and you make clear that her reputation, you make good on her reputation. It's straightforward.
Yeah. All right, after the break, we're going to talk about the bizarre call for a man ban. As I said, no man ban on this program, plus Donald Trump and the fiery appearance outside court after the break. Well, as you know, domestic violence has been in the spotlight, but an article suggesting ways to curb it is causing a stir. The headline reads, "Is it time to stop men congregating in groups?" And this could mean no footy training, no group chats, no rowdy tables at pub trivia. Well, Ben Fordham said this morning that the idea was utter madness.
I think we've reached peak madness. And the blokes playing pub trivia or the blokes at footy training, they're probably the same blokes who'd be first to step in and help.
Caleb, what do you think about this? Do you think the debate about domestic violence is now just going too far when people are suggesting banning groups of men?
Yeah, I mean, look, the suggestion is pretty brain dead, isn't it? I understand the objective of the author's column, and all three of us are columnists at various times, and I understand the idea that you want to provoke a reaction. And if you read through the entire column, the point she is getting at is that women feel unsafe in some situations, so why should women be made to feel unsafe? Perhaps the men should have to take a hit so women feel safe. I get the argument she is making. But to take something that is as serious as domestic violence and sexual violence, which is referenced in the column, and to then suggest, well, the solution is to ban men from gathering, you know, come on. If you really want to bring men along with the discussion, and you had this this discussion with Josh Zepps last week, I think it was, or it might have been earlier this week even. But if you want to bring men along with you, you actually have to bring them to the table and say, this is what we need you to do to help, and this is why you should help. Going down the road of saying, well, you know, you're all potentially violent, even though we all know it's not true, it does turn people off, and I don't think that's good for the cause.
Yeah. I mean, Nick Cater, you like a bit of a male gathering. You're a cyclist. Can you imagine being told you couldn't cycle in with a group of men anymore?
Look, I don't think we'd do any harm to anybody, certainly no women, except perhaps, you know, the sight of the lycra may be a little bit difficult for some. But look, I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd, Sharri. And this is really a long-running campaign, beginning with you know, feminists who thought they would say this is all about being a man. It's not about being a man. It's about being. It's about behaving in an outrageous and unacceptable and violent and often criminal way. That's what it's about. It's about criminal behaviour. Okay, so some men rob banks, but does that mean to say we stop men going anywhere near banks? I mean, that's the kind of logic we're getting to on this. Instead, we should deal with the people themselves, that we should make sure that the police are fully equipped and the law is on their side to come down hard on men who do cowardly things to women. And we should also look at underlying causes.
Okay, we've got to quickly get to Donald Trump now. His historic hush money trial is nearing its end, and we've seen his former fixer, former lawyer, Michael Cohen, admit to stealing tens of thousands of dollars from his company. I don't know if we have time to play you Trump's comments, but Caleb, what did you make of Michael Cohen's evidence?
Oh, look, you know, this whole trial has been exactly what we expected it would be, which is a show trial. The point is to try and, you know, string Trump up for what purpose we don't really know, except to beat the chests of Democrats and say, look at us, we're trying to get the man. And Cohen is no different. It does not make a lick of difference what Cohen or Trump or anyone else says in that courtroom. It is not going to change a single vote in the United States. If you're going to vote for Trump, you already know you're going to vote for Trump. And if you're not going to vote for Trump, well, you're already not voting for him. This case ain't changing it. The whole thing has been a joke.
Yeah, well, Nick Cater, what's your verdict on how this is going to play out for Trump?
It's playing out very well, because all the polling shows that the less he talks about politics, the higher his ratings go. And so the Democrats or whoever's driving this case has done him a great favour by getting him concentrated on something else. And, you know, it is a show trial, as Caleb said, but it's a show trial that's really, I suppose it does two things. One, it keeps Democrat spirits up because they've got a pretty dismal election ahead with Biden in charge. But it also boosts Trump, as we know that this actually has a positive effect.
All right, Nick Cater, enjoy Stockholm. Caleb Bond, we'll see you back at 10 o'clock. Thanks, everyone, for your company. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. And here's my great mate, Paul Murray.